Hello, everyone. This is Black Kids in Outer Space, and today I'm quite excited. I have Veronica O. Davis. She is a Veronica O. Davis is a transportation nerd who uses her knowledge to spark progressive social change in the community. Currently, she's a co-owner and principal planning manager at Nspiregreen LLC. In July 2012, the White House recognized her as a champion of change and transportation innovator for her professional accomplishments and community advocacy in the District of Columbia. Veronica is one of the co-founders of Black Women Bikes, an organization and movement that encourages African-American women to use biking for health and wellness, as well as an alternative form for commuting. She holds a dual master's degree, engineering and management and regional planning from Cornell, and a BS in civil engineering from University of Maryland. She's a registered professional engineer in the District of Columbia, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, and Georgia. Wow. It's like, I have to say that I typically don't read everyone's, I don't typically read everyone's bios, but I thought yours was like really kind of impressive and just like amazing that you are, that you did so much even before you did so much. So, I mean, so let's kind of like, why did you go into transportation? Like what inspired you?
I think, I think part of it was a little bit of faith at work. I was almost born in the US DOT building. And at the time, my dad worked for UMTA, the Urban Mass Transit Authority, the predecessor to the Federal Transit Administration. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, my mom was like, trying to pick him up from work and she went into labor. And then my dad worked in his career. He worked at the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. My mom worked for New York City Transit Authority. So mm-hmm. whenever I was off from school, I was either at the Port of Elizabeth with my dad overseeing mm-hmm. Shipping operations, or I was with my mom at transit. So I think it was one of those things that was always kind of there. All my toys were trains or race cars, anything related to like, driving trains. And I had 2 airplanes. So that's kind of, I think, what laid the foundation. But quite frankly, I went to Maryland as an undergrad and I had no idea what I wanted to study. Mm-hmm. I knew I was going to do engineering because I was really good at physics and chemistry. But even then I was like, I didn't know what I was going to major in. So I was like, I'll just pick engineering, which I don't know like who does that.
I don't either. I remember my engineering friends being very tired and sad, like all the time. But maybe that wasn't their path. But go ahead.
Yeah. So originally I was engineering undecided, and 3 weeks into the semester, we had a chemistry exam, and I walked out of that exam, and I was like, I need a major where I never have to take chemistry again in life. Mm-hmm. And civil was like the one that was like right at top, and I was like, perfect, I'll do it. Yeah. And so really what inspired me for transportation, my professor, Dr. Sermons, it was my introduction to transportation class. And I was like, wow, this is really exciting. Mm-hmm. Because it really, one of the things I learned from him is how transportation had destroyed a lot of communities, particularly low-income communities, particularly African-American communities, Latino-American communities. And, you can see the destructive nature of transportation, but then you can also see the transformative nature of transportation when people had access to healthcare, to jobs, to healthy food, to school, to education. So that's really, that class is what got me excited about transportation and also got me excited about studying planning, which is why I went on for my master's from there.
No, I mean, I think that's, one of the amazing things about you is kind of like your parents your mother worked at the New York Metro in HR, and your father was, the head of let's see here, he was the executive or the chief executive officer for the American Society of Civil Engineers. But mm-hmm. then you, on your own, you kind of found that path too as something that you wanted to do to help make people's lives better. So what are one of your proudest accomplishments as an engineer and as a planner? Like, do you view yourself more of an engineer or a planner?
It really depends on the mood and the day. probably more of a planner overall, particularly in a lot of the work that we do at Nspiregreen. We're mostly on the front end of someone has an idea or someone has a problem. And so the planning process really is about how do we get to a solution, and more importantly, how do we plan with the community? So probably one of my favorite projects in my career was when I was with the city of Alexandria working as a planner, and it was working on the Alexandria waterfront plan, because it really was, we did extremely comprehensive engagement. I don't think I've ever had a project with that level of engagement. Everything from walking tours to understanding the history of place. Because I think so often we can get so focused on what we want to see in the future that we forgot what this place used to be. And particularly that waterfront was a working waterfront for the slave trade, as well as industrial area and all of that. But it's really to be able to talk about what this place was before you start thinking about what it can be in the future. We even did a boat tour where we looked back at the city to see, okay, what does it look like from the water? We did best practices. I think a lot of times for those of us in this world, we live and breathe best practices. I mean, I read blogs, most mornings to see what's happening in other cities. The average citizen is just trying to make it through the day. They're trying to figure out how to pay the bills, how to keep their family fed. And so we did a lot of best practices workshops to help the community understand what is happening and how other like areas are tackling some of the same challenges. And then we took a bunch of elected leaders, appointed leaders to New York City to give them an opportunity to experience. So you're not just looking at a PowerPoint of someone telling you a best practice. I mean, and plus we had meetings just to talk about history, to figure out how we were going to grapple with the history of this waterfront. And then we had, we talked about the waterfront. So to me, I think it was one of my really, favorite projects to work on. And then to go back and see that, the ground is being broken, that development is occurring, that change is happening. It's just really exciting.
That is just like an exciting thing that I, just being able to go back in the past and then go to the future, because I think a lot of people do forget about the past when they are doing these kinds of projects. They're kind of like, let's make this anything new and fresh, and kind of forgetting about the people that live there now. I mean, I guess it's kind of like one of the challenges that, you might have in DC, where you have a population that's kind of, I have to say, when I went to DC, I was kind of, being from California, being from Los Angeles, and kind of hearing this idea, hearing that it was like the chocolate city, and kind of going there and not seeing that, kind of seeing remnants of it. I mean, I've been there like several times. And I was kind of like, wow, it's so great that you are working with the agency, working with the, I guess they call it Metro, DC Metro, to kind of make sure that at least with the transportation piece, that the community is still included. Can you tell us a little bit about your work with Move DC and the streetcar that they have, the wonderful streetcar that they have that kind of goes to the north and south side of, is it north and south or east and west?
Okay. So just a little bit about some of our projects. We had an opportunity to work on the Move DC plan for the district, and it really is the city's multimodal transportation plan. Our role specifically was outreach and engagement of, we had a goal of, we had to engage 10,000 unique people throughout the process. Okay. And we more than exceeded that. And I think the thing that we really brought to that was making sure we went to all 8 wards at least once. We had meetings outside, we had meetings at Union Station to engage visitors. Because the thing about the district, there are people who live here, and then our population does, double during the day, because we do have people from, our workforce coming in from the outer areas. And then we have a lot of visitors, such as yourself, to our city to really experience the city. So it was really a great opportunity to engage different types of people and to bring a different lens. One of the conversations that we had during that was we reached out to low-income service providers, and specifically people who work with the homeless. I think that we don't think about the homeless as a part of the transportation system, but the sidewalk is part of the system. And people who are homeless, I think there's this misconception about the homeless. Some of them do have jobs, and they are transporting themselves from wherever they may be staying, whether a temporary shelter, to a place of employment, and they need to get around. And so it was really understanding what are those needs, how are they moving around, and how can we best serve their needs through Move DC. And from that, we've had an opportunity to work on other projects in the city. We are working on a transit priority project to look at see how can we move the buses so that people can get to work, can get to school. We did work on the DC streetcar program. So the existing line is on H Street. Our specific piece that we worked on was north-south, which has not been built and is currently tabled at the moment. But we did have an opportunity to work on the streetcar maintenance facility piece as it expands into Georgetown, and what does that look like? And how can this storage facility be more than just a storage facility? Particularly since it is likely going to be on the east side of the city where that's the land that is available, but how can it also be an asset to the community? So those are some of the things that we grappled with. Some of the things I'm most proud about, Nspiregreen, we led the DC Vision Zero action plan. And what was great about our plan, it was really the first action plan in the US that involved citizens. It wasn't just a bunch of government bureaucrats in a room, coming up with Vision Zero. We had 10 meetings around the city in the span of 3 weeks, and we were on the street corners. We were in we hit every ward, a couple areas that we hit very specialty areas where we knew we would have tourists as well. But we went to every single ward, and we engaged over, about 3,000 people in that process. And what was more important, I think sometimes with Vision Zero, we can get so caught up in the data, or we can get so caught up in the analysis that we forget about, it's about people. Although at the time it was 26 people had been killed in the previous year that we were working on it in the city, and people say, oh, it's only 26 people. And it's like, yeah, but those are 26 people who aren't going home to their family, to their friends. And when we were out in the streets engaging the community, there was a significant chunk of the population that had someone that either was killed in a accident, a crash, or who was seriously injured. And there were just the stories of, mothers who lost their sons, wives who lost their husbands. And so you realize, like, this work of Vision Zero, at the end of the day, it's about people. It's about every time someone moves through our system, whether they're walking, whether they're biking, and then they're in a wheelchair, they're in a scooter, they're whatever, that they are arriving to their place alive and unharmed. And I think that's the importance of Vision Zero. And that's a plan that I'm really proud of, that our company had an opportunity to work on. And, we've won several awards as a result of our engagement, our outreach, and really, I think, putting towards a plan that, really reflects the values of the city.
I think that's, that's one of the things that I noticed about reading about your organization. You guys have won a lot of awards, and you guys have done a lot of outreach, and you're almost kind of a model of how to actually do outreach properly. I have to say, a lot of times when I see outreach, I don't know if I view it as real outreach. I kind of view it as like not being authentic. But I think that, Nspiregreen has done some really amazing work in regards to authentic outreach. I mean, I look at the numbers for pedestrian fatalities in DC, and they've dropped 57%. Maryland, I don't know if that has anything to do with you guys, but I would assume that it's kind of, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, dropped 13%, which is kind of like, I think, I don't know if you had anything to do with that.
I heard it. Why not?
yeah. But I mean, is this in regards to the infrastructure and the safety and all these kind of things? Is it going to the wards 7 and 8, which is a predominantly African-American and economically oppressed communities? Is it reaching those communities? I'm assuming that it is, but I feel like I have to ask.
Yeah, so one of the things that the district does, so we worked on the Move DC plan, which is kind of the big framework for, networks, and so that we're doing complete networks. So we don't have a bike lane to nowhere or a sidewalk, where the sidewalk ends. So, one of the things that the district does, they call them livability studies. And that's looking at neighborhood scales where you're looking at mobility, safety, and then green infrastructure at the same time. We had the opportunity to work on one of them. It finished about 2 years ago, the Far Southeast 3 livability study, which was a large chunk of Ward 7. And it was focused on safety, like how do we really pour resources into making this area safer, engaging the community to understand that. And as we talk about history, one of the things that happened at one of our public meetings is that people were going back to like in 1973, so-and-so promised me this, and you're like, wow, you've been holding on to this for 40 years, And so you do have communities that have been looking to safety. And so really coming up with the overall vision for livability, for finding ways to make it safer. So there are investments that are happening in Ward 7 and Ward 8. I know that DDOT, we did not work on it, but DDOT did a study on Alabama Avenue, which is really a critical corridor that connects Ward 7 and Ward 8. I used to live off of Alabama Avenue for about 10 years, and it is an absolutely crucial spine, not only for walking, but for the bus. That is probably the only bus that really gets you almost completely north and south. So I was really glad to see the city move forward with that analysis. And so, we hope that it will continue to move forward.
Okay. That, and then we're going to kind of like we're going to switch gears because we only have like 20 minutes. I want to ask about your Black women bicycle, Black Women Do Bicycle, or Black Women Do Bike in DC. It's, that was kind of one of the ways I actually first got introduced to you. And then I was like, and you're an engineer too, and you do all these other things. But, you were one of the co-founders of Black Women Bike in DC. Why did you feel that this was important to do and to start?
It's actually, we have an accidental finding, if you will. I was biking, so we just started the company. And when you start a company, you realize you're like, how can I cut all my unnecessary expenses? Because it really is an investment, which is that's a interview for another day. But I was biking, and so this young girl was like, mommy, there's this Black woman on a bike. And I was talking about this over Twitter with Najima Washington and Inse Ufut, and we were just having this conversation. We started using the hashtag Black Women Bike as just really a stance of we exist. And from there, we just started a Facebook group. It was just the 3 of us. We invited like 10 people. And, just in the span of a week, we went from like 10 people to 60 people. And then we were profiled in the Washington Post, and we went from 60 people to 400 people. Right now, we're a little over 1,800 people in our Facebook group. And, I can say that we are getting women on bicycles. I think that there's really 2 types of people that we attract. So one, there are women who are already doing, the centuries and, Power Rangered up, but they won't bike on the street, so it's getting those people who are very strong bicyclists, but getting them on the street and getting them to think about a bike as transportation and not just exercise. And then the other group that we tend to attract are women who are interested in biking for transportation. And specifically, we're getting those young retirees, people who are under the old federal government system. So they're in their like late 50s, early 60s. They're young, they're vibrant, they want to stay active, they want to reduce their household costs. And that is a large group that not only are we getting them on bicycles, but they are getting certified as cycling instructors, and they're getting all the women on bicycles. So it's been really great to see, over the last almost 7 years, how the organization has really taken off and how it's really grown, and how we're able to really kind of, impact communities, and then more importantly, advocate for infrastructure in our neighborhoods. Because I think it's really hard, particularly when we talk about Ward 7 and Ward 8, you have people advocating for bike lanes, but they don't look like the people who live in the neighborhood, or oftentimes they're outside of the neighborhood and they need to get through the neighborhood. But it's great to have people from the neighborhood to say, nope, I'm here and I bike and this is what I need.
And I think that's, one of the important things, just to have people to kind of like who understand you, not just that you look like me, but you understand that I'm an actual human being. I know that you're car free still. And what roles do you feel? Because I know that, one thing is trying to get people out there on their bicycles and out of their cars. but what roles do you feel the government has in supporting people in not having to drive?
You know, when I think about the government, when I think about, transportation professionals, I think it really is about having reliable, affordable, safe transportation systems, whether it's the public transportation, whether it's bike infrastructure, whether it's sidewalks. I think that is what the government owes the people. Because if you think about why most people drive, I know that if I drive from point A to point B, it's a predictable trip. It's going to be a predictable 30 minutes. But my bus, maybe it shows up on time, maybe it shows 5 minutes late, shows through 2 minutes early, and for me, I take the bus to work, but I know in the morning my bus comes every 5 to 6 minutes. So even if I miss a bus, I know there's one coming. But on Sunday, when it's a 30-minute headway, minutes. So I think it's really about thinking about reliable and frequent service, for public transportation, and making sure that people really have access, and making sure that we're thinking beyond the commuter trips. One of the things about my profession that drives me nuts is that we're so focused on getting people to work and the rush hour. But there are people who are going to work, but they're going midday, they're going early morning, they're going late at night, maybe they're a waiter. There are, people who don't go to work, but they are going to other places. They need to get to the grocery store. You have persons with disabilities who want to be independent, who want to use a public transportation system. So I think that we have to really get beyond this idea of the rush hour. It's important, don't get me wrong, but we also have to think about all the other ways people move, all the other trips that people make. Going from home to work and work to home, that's only 2 trips that you make. But think about all the trips you make in a day. You walk to lunch, you walk your dog, you do all these other trips. And I think we really need to focus on that and get out of this old mindset of home to work, work to home.
I think especially on the East Coast, that's something that's very important. I noticed that in Los Angeles, we have the opposite problem with regards to our public transit. And we have to kind of figure out a way to get back and forth to work. I'm sorry, I didn't have some feedback. So one thing I want to ask you about is you want to be the transportation secretary. So let me know what you're going to do when that happens.
I don't know when it's going to happen, but when I used to work for Federal Highway, when I was 22 years old, it was right after 9/11, and I had an opportunity to see Norman Mineta, and I was like, wow, that's the job I want. I was 22. I didn't really know much about much. But then when I worked for the Federal Highway Administration, every day I would come into the office and I'd walk up to the secretary's floor and I would look at all the pictures of all the previous secretaries, and I'd be like, this is where my picture is going to go, and really visualize. So it is something that's important, because I think that it comes from the top. I think that we need bold leadership in the position of Secretary of Transportation, such that we're funding things that make sense for communities, whether it's a rural community, a suburban, urban, that we're funding things that make sense, and we're funding things that are sustainable into 2 generations from now. In the immediate, it may make sense to widen a highway, but in 2 generations, does it make sense? And I think that's how we really need to be thinking of what is our future, what does 100 years look like, and really think about how we build that system. And so I think that's, to me, a top-down, visionary thing. And so I do hope one day to be nominated and appointed as the U.S. Secretary of Transportation.
No, I think that's going to happen. I'm sure that's going to actually happen. So I'm going to go back to New Jersey. You're kind of
the great state of New Jersey. The great state of New Jersey.
Okay, we just kind of started our bikes in Camden. Do you feel that the dockless are more equitable than the dock bike for bike share?
I haven't dug deep into the data, but I can just say from an observation, what I've seen here in the DC region is, I know with the docked bikes, there's been kind of this struggle to market into particularly, Black and brown communities, period, regardless of income. What I saw with Lime Bike and Mo Bike on the days that, the first day that it opened up, and OFO and others, is that there was like an immediate adoption of these bicycles. And I think part of it is, you know, even with docked bikes, you're limited to space because at some point you have to have you don't have the saturation in some of the communities, and in the way that a docked list system is able to really penetrate into a street, into a neighborhood a little bit differently. So it has been a wonderful thing to see. I know there's accusations of bikes being stolen and all of that, but I don't know about that. But at the end of the day, people are using the bikes, and I'm just really seeing an embracing of bikes. And this is what we want, right? Like at the end of the day, as a city, we've said we want people biking. We put a lot of effort, energy, and money to get more Black and brown people biking, particularly teens. They're biking. So I think it's been wonderful to see. I've just seen so many teens, you know, biking in my neighborhood, biking to school, you know, even biking, taking it on the metro. I actually walked up to one guy. I was like, "Why are you bringing the bike?" And he was like, "Well, where I'm going, I want to make sure I have a bike so I can make the rest of my trip." So I think people are. It's just been amazing to see. I am excited about it. I mean, there are challenges that we need to overcome, but I don't think they're insurmountable.
Was there anything that you want to leave us with?
Oh my goodness. I'd say that at the end of the day, I think for those of us in this transportation space, we have to remember what we're here for. And we can get focused on technology. We can salivate over, you know, AV and all of that. But at the end of the day, it's about people. And our job is to make sure that we're moving people, that we're being just in how we move people. And something that comes from, we have to look historically. We have to talk about the history of a place, understand the history of a place, understand the history of that community and what they've been through, particularly since when you look at communities that have been cut in half by transportation systems, they remember it. You know, they might have been a child, but they remember when they used to be able to walk from their neighborhood to Anacostia Park, but now they're cut off by 295 and there's only but so many access points. So I think that we need to look at the history. And I think as we think about complete streets, it really is about righting historical wrongs and making sure that we're prioritizing people, people walking, people biking, people using mobility devices. It really is about focusing on people.
Wow, that was amazing. So thank you so much for coming and talking to us at Black Kids in Outer Space. And thank you all for watching. Bye.
Bye. Have a good evening.
Black kids in outer space. Black kids in outer space. Black kids in outer space. Urban planning, walking, bicycling, and more in our space.